Hello, my friend. Welcome. Settle in, get comfortable, and let your shoulders drop. Before we drift back in time together, if you enjoy these journeys we take, please take a soft moment to like and subscribe to the podcast. It helps us a lot, and it costs nothing at all to you. And if you'd like to support the stories we tell, a little donation at ko-fi.com/history to relax can help a lot, keeping the fire lit for our next adventure. But for now, there is nothing else you need to do. Just close your eyes, take a deep, slow breath in, and let it out. Let go of the day, let go of the rushing, the glowing screens, the endless demanding noise of our modern world. Tonight, we are going somewhere much older and much, much quieter. We are traveling back over 2,500 years. Imagine the air around you changing. It is no longer the still, conditioned air of a closed room. It is the crisp, cool, incredibly fresh breeze of a high mountain range. You are standing in the Zagros Mountains, a massive, rugged spine of stone that stretches across the western edge of what we now call Iran. The landscape here is breathtaking, painted in shades of dusty ochre, deep canyon shadows, and the brilliant, blinding white of snow-capped peaks. The wind whistles softly through the narrow mountain passes, a gentle, continuous lullaby that has sounded exactly the same for millennia. It rustles through the leaves of wild pistachio trees and ancient twisting oaks that cling to the rocky slopes. If you take a deep breath, you can smell the sharp, clean scent of wild mountain mint, crushed thyme, and the rich, damp aroma of earth that has just drank in a brief afternoon rain. It is here, high up in these quiet, wind-swept valleys, that our story begins. It does not begin with grand palaces of marble, nor with heavy crowns of gold, nor with the marching of massive armies. It begins with something much simpler, much closer to the earth. It begins with the rhythm of walking. Before they were an empire, the Persians were a nomadic people. They called themselves the Parsa. They did not live in cities made of heavy stone, but in vast, sweeping tents woven from the dark, coarse hair of mountain goats. These tents were marvels of ancient, practical engineering. The dark goat hair was naturally oily, which meant that when the heavy winter rains fell, the fibers would swell and lock together, creating a waterproof roof that kept everyone inside completely dry. But during the baking heat of the summer months, the fibers would shrink just enough to let the cool mountain breezes flow through, carrying the scent of almond blossoms right into their homes. To live as a nomad is to live in a constant, gentle dialogue with the earth. You cannot command the land, you must listen to it. You must pay attention to the subtle changing of the light, the direction of the wind, and the feeling of the soil beneath your boots. The early Persians moved with the seasons in a great slow migration known as transhumance. When the snows began to melt in the spring, turning the mountain streams into rushing, crystal-clear rivers of ice water, they would pack their tents and drive their herds of sheep, horses, and goats up into the high green alpine pastures. And when the leaves began to turn golden and the first bitter bite of winter returned to the air, they would slowly make their way back down into the warmer, sheltered valleys. It was a life of simple, grounding routines. Imagine the sounds of their mornings. Long before the sun crested the jagged peaks, the camp would begin to stir in the cool blue twilight. You would hear the soft, sleepy bleating of sheep greeting the dawn. You would hear the crunch of frost under soft leather boots. There would be the rhythmic clinking of clay pots as families gathered water from a freezing mountain stream. The water so pure and cold it would make your hands ache, but it tasted sweeter than anything you could imagine. And then, of course, there were the goats. Goats, as anyone who has ever spent time with them will tell you, are not the most cooperative of travel companions. They are curious, stubborn, and wonderfully mischievous. They have their own very specific ideas about where they want to go and what they want to eat, which usually involves the one lonely, prickly bush sitting on the very edge of a dangerously steep cliff. You can almost imagine the gentle laughter and the occasional frustrated sigh of the ancient herdsman. You can picture them running up loose, rocky slopes, waving their wooden staffs, trying to guide a fiercely independent goat back to the safety of the flock, day after day, year after year. It was hard work, certainly, but it was honest, grounded work. It kept them moving. It taught these people patience, resilience, and the deep value of walking forward together, making sure no one and no goat was left behind. Because they were always moving, the ancient Persians learned to travel light. They did not weigh themselves down with heavy wooden furniture, large statues, or fragile pottery that would break on the rough mountain trails. Instead, their wealth, their comfort, and their art were woven into things they could easily roll up and carry across the back of a horse. They became absolute masters of textiles. Imagine walking through the camp on a sunny afternoon. Outside the dark tents, you would hear the steady, hypnotic thwack, thwack, thwack of the heavy wooden looms. The women of the tribe were creating masterpieces out of wool. They dyed their yarn using whatever the mountains provided. They gathered the roots of the madder plant to create deep, passionate reds. They traded for precious indigo to dye the wool a blue as dark as the midnight sky. They used walnut husks for rich, earthy browns, and the rinds of wild pomegranates for bright, sunny yellows. When you stepped inside one of those great, dark tents as the evening approached, the floor would be completely covered in these thick, beautiful, vibrant rugs. They were soft underfoot, a patchwork of geometric patterns and stories woven in wool. These rugs weren't just decorations. They were the very foundation of the home. They kept the damp, cold earth away from their sleeping children. They were a soft place to sit, to eat, and to rest tired legs after a long day of guiding the herds. Outside the tents, grazing peacefully in the high meadows, were the horses. The Persians and their horses shared a bond that went far beyond mere transportation. They raised a magnificent breed known as the Nizam horse. These animals were legendary in the ancient world. They were tall, strong, with thick necks and a proud, elegant way of carrying themselves. To the Persians, a horse was a partner, a trusted friend in the vast wilderness. They did not use harsh bits or cruel spurs. They guided their horses with gentle pressure from their knees and a soft shift in their weight. Imagine the sound of the horses at dusk, the gentle tearing of green grass, the soft, rhythmic snorts as they clear the dust from their noses, the comforting smell of warm horsehair and worn leather saddles resting on wooden stands. The warriors of the tribe learned to ride before they could walk. They learned to move in perfect harmony with these great animals, able to shoot a bow with astonishing accuracy while galloping across an uneven plain. But the true beauty of their horsemanship was not in war. It was in the deep, quiet respect between the rider and the animal. A silent understanding built over thousands of miles traveled together under the open sky. As the sun begins to dip below the jagged mountain peaks, the temperature drops quickly, a sharp reminder of the altitude. The sky fades from a brilliant pale blue into a rich, velvety purple, and then into a deep, endless black. Out here, far away from the smog and the lights of any modern city, the stars do not just appear, they explode across the sky. It is not just a few scattered dots, but a heavy, sparkling blanket of silver dust. The Milky Way stretches from one horizon to the other, looking like a glowing river of light poured across the heavens. In the center of the camp, a fire is lit. The first spark catches the dry brush, and soon the flames are leaping upward, painting the faces of the tribe in warm, dancing shades of orange and gold. The smell of dry wood smoke fills the air. It is a comforting, deeply earthy scent that signals the end of the day's labor. It means safety. It means warmth. It means community. Families gather close around the glowing embers. The day's work is done. They share warm flatbread, baked earlier that day on flat, heated stones. The bread is slightly charred on the edges, crispy and chewy all at once. They pass around bowls of thick, sour mountain yogurt, perhaps flavored with a little wild mint gathered from the riverbanks, alongside handfuls of roasted almonds and pistachios. It is a simple meal, but eaten out here, in the cold, crisp air after a day of physical work, it tastes like an absolute feast. This is where the culture of the Persians truly began to bloom, around the fire. They did not have a written language yet. They didn't have libraries of clay tablets or scrolls of papyrus. So, their history, their laws, their religion, and their dreams were all carried in the spoken word. The air would fill with the low, soothing cadence of the elders' voices. As the fire crackled and popped, sending tiny, glowing golden sparks floating up to join the stars, the stories would begin. They told epic tales of great heroes who fought against the darkness, heroes who rode swift horses and carried bows of horn and wood. They spoke of the eternal, delicate balance of the universe. To the Persians, the world was an ongoing dance between Asha, which meant truth, order, and the natural beauty of the world, and Druj, which meant the lie, chaos, and destruction. Their early religion, a philosophy that would eventually blossom into Zoroastrianism, was deeply, intimately tied to the natural world around them. To them, the elements were not just things to use, they were sacred. Water was life, and they had strict rules about never polluting a river or a stream. The earth was a provider, to be treated with respect. But above all, fire was holy. Fire was a symbol of purity, of warmth, and of the divine, illuminating light of wisdom. When they looked into the dancing flames of the campfire, they did not just see burning wood. They saw the presence of a good, just Creator watching over them, keeping the shadows of the night at bay. In these quiet, reflective moments, sitting shoulder to shoulder with their families, the Persians would sometimes look down from their high mountain camps. Far below them, stretching out in the dark, lay the vast flat plains of Mesopotamia. Down there, in the valleys between the great rivers, they knew that a different world existed. Down there lay ancient, massive, incredibly wealthy empires, the Babylonians, the Medes, the mighty Assyrians. These were people who built towering ziggurats of baked mud brick that seemed to try and pierce the sky. They built sprawling, crowded cities surrounded by impossibly thick walls. They had kings who sat on thrones of solid gold and commanded armies of tens of thousands. For centuries, the Persians were just a humble tribe of horse riders and shepherds, a footnote in the grand histories of the valley. They paid their taxes and their tributes of fine horses to these bigger, louder kingdoms, and they kept to themselves. They were the people of the mountains. They were quiet, observant, and incredibly tough. But down in the valleys, the old empires were growing tired. The air down there was stale. Those kingdoms were becoming rigid, paranoid, and cruel. They obsessed over control and domination. When they conquered a neighboring city, they ruled by fear. They dragged statues of foreign gods away. They forced conquered people to abandon their languages, and they ruled with an iron fist that crushed the spirit of the people they governed. The world below the mountains was heavy with invisible chains, thick with resentment, and ready to break. The Persians, up in their woven tents, valuing their freedom, their movement, and the vast open sky, watched and waited. They were learning how to survive the harshest winters. They were learning how to ride with unmatched grace. But more importantly, as they watched the empires below crumble under the weight of their own cruelty, the Persians were learning a quiet, profound lesson about leadership. They were learning that a shepherd who guides their flock with care, who knows the safest paths and the sweetest waters, will always have a stronger, more loyal following than a master who simply beats his animals with a heavy stick. True power, they realized, did not come from crushing the people beneath you. It came from lifting them up. The mountain wind shifts, blowing a little softer now. The night deepens, wrapping the Zagros Mountains in a thick, peaceful, heavy quiet. The campfires have slowly burned down, turning from roaring orange flames into soft, gently pulsing red embers that glow like dragon's eyes in the dark. The sheep are fast asleep, huddled closely together in a large woolly mass for warmth, their breathing slow and steady. The great Nisan horses stand quietly under the stars, occasionally shifting their weight, their eyes half closed in rest. The ancient herdsmen and weavers pull their thick woolen cloaks tightly around their shoulders, resting their heads on the soft rugs they wove with their own hands. They close their eyes, and they surrender to sleep. They do not know it yet, but this quiet, simple, isolated era is about to end. The wheel of history is slowly turning. Down in the southern lands of Persia, in a small, dusty, sun-baked province known as Anshan, the dawn is about to break on a new age. A child has been born, a boy who will not just unite these wandering mountain tribes. He will look out at the tired, broken, fearful world below, and he will decide to build a completely new kind of empire. An empire built not on fear, but on a beautiful, radical dream of unity. His name is Cyrus, a name that, even today, carries a quiet, golden weight. Cyrus. To the ancient Greeks, he was known as Cyrus the Elder. To his own people, he was simply called the Father. But before he was a father to an empire, he was a boy learning how to live under the vast open skies of the Iranian plateau. The education of a young Persian in those days was remarkably simple, yet profoundly beautiful. The ancient historians tell us that Persian boys were taught only three things: to ride a horse, to shoot a bow, and to always, always speak the truth. Imagine the feeling of growing up with such a clear, grounded purpose. There were no complex politics for a child to navigate, no crowded, noisy classrooms. His classroom was the sweeping plains of Anshan. Picture a young Cyrus, the early morning sun warming his shoulders, his hands learning the feel of a braided leather rein. He learned to move in perfect rhythm with his horse, trusting the animal and earning its trust in return. When he learned to shoot the bow, he wasn't just learning a weapon of war. He was learning focus. He learned to pull the stiff wooden bowstring back, feeling the tension in his shoulders, holding his breath as the wind brushed past his ears, and waiting for that perfect, quiet moment of stillness before letting the arrow fly. But it was the third lesson, to speak the truth, that truly shaped the world. In the ancient Persian mind, a lie was the greatest of all evils. A lie was a disruption of the natural order of the universe. To speak the truth was to align yourself with the light, with the sun, and with everything that was good and solid in the world. Cyrus took this lesson deep into his heart. He grew up believing that a man's word should be as unbreakable as the stones of the Zagros Mountains. As Cyrus grew from a boy into a young man, he looked around at the world beyond his mountains, and he saw a world that was desperately tired of lying. The great empires of the Middle East, the Medes, the Lydians, the mighty Babylonians, were ruled by kings who had forgotten how to listen. They sat on heavy thrones, surrounded by thick stone walls, completely disconnected from the earth and from the people they governed. They ruled through fear, taking hostages, burning temples, and forcing millions of people to bow to gods they did not know. The air across the ancient Near East was thick with anxiety. It was a world holding its breath, waiting for the heavy hand of a tyrant to strike. Cyrus, with the calm, observant eyes of a nomad, saw that this was no way to build a lasting legacy. You cannot build a home on a foundation of fear, because fear eventually turns to exhaustion, and exhaustion turns to dust. When the time came for Cyrus to step up and lead the Persian tribes, he didn't do it with a reign of terror. He did something that, in the ancient world, was entirely radical. He simply asked them to join him. He rode from camp to camp, sitting by the evening fires, sharing bread, and speaking of a new way forward. He gathered the scattered, wandering tribes of the mountains and wove them together like the threads of a massive, unbreakable rug. His first great challenge was the Median Empire, a powerful kingdom to the north that had long demanded tribute from the Persians. The legends say that the Median king, Astyages, was a harsh and paranoid ruler. When Cyrus marched his newly united Persian forces to meet the Median army, something incredible happened. The soldiers of the Median army, tired of their cruel king, simply lowered their weapons. They looked at Cyrus, this calm, charismatic leader from the mountains who promised fairness instead of cruelty, and they walked across the battlefield to join him. It was a revolution won, not with a river of blood, but with a collective sigh of relief. This became the signature of Cyrus the Great. He was a conqueror, yes, but he was a conqueror who arrived with open hands. As his influence spread, the map of the world began to change colors. He moved west into Lydia, and then he turned his eyes toward the absolute jewel of the ancient world, Babylon. Babylon. Even the name sounds like a myth. It was the greatest city on earth, a sprawling metropolis sitting on the banks of the mighty Euphrates River. It had walls so thick that 2 4-horse chariots could race side by side along the top of them. It had the brilliant, towering, glazed blue bricks of the Ishtar Gate, shining like a sapphire in the desert sun. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of burning frankincense and the sounds of a million voices bartering in crowded marketplaces. But inside those massive walls, the heart of Babylon was broken. The city had captured tens of thousands of people from other lands, including the Jewish people from Jerusalem, and forced them into exile. The Babylonian king, Nabonidus, spent all his time ignoring the city's traditions, neglecting the local gods, and angering the priests. The people of Babylon were trapped in a gilded cage, miserable and exhausted. When Cyrus and his Persian army arrived at the walls of Babylon in the autumn of 539 BC, the citizens inside braced themselves for a nightmare. They had spent their whole lives hearing stories of how empires fall. They expected the battering rams. They expected the fire. They expected the screaming, the looting, and the destruction of their beautiful temples. But the Persians did not bring fire. They brought patience. The story goes that the walls of Babylon were too strong to break, and the city had enough food stored inside to last for 20 years. But the Euphrates River flowed right through the center of the city, passing under the great walls. So, under the cover of a cool, starry night, Cyrus ordered his men to gently, quietly dig trenches upriver. They didn't build war machines. They did what they had learned to do in the mountains. They worked with the water, slowly, smoothly. They diverted the flow of the mighty Euphrates into a nearby marshland. As the water level dropped, leaving nothing but soft, muddy banks, The Persian soldiers simply waded into the riverbed, walked under the massive city walls, and stepped into Babylon. They did not draw their swords. They did not kick down doors. The historical records tell us that the Persian army entered the city so peacefully that the people on the other side of town didn't even know they had been conquered until the next morning. There was no looting. There was no burning. It was the quietest conquest in the history of the world. Imagine waking up in Babylon the next morning. You step out of your mud brick house, expecting to see smoke and ruin. Instead, you see Persian soldiers, with their soft felt caps and long bows, calmly walking the streets, buying fruit from the local vendors, and treating the citizens with respect. It must have felt like waking up from a long, feverish nightmare. Cyrus immediately did something that cemented his name in history forever. He called for a scribe, a man who worked with wet clay and a tiny wooden stylus. Cyrus dictated a message to the people of Babylon and to the world. This message was pressed into a small, barrel-shaped piece of clay that we now call the Cyrus cylinder. If you could hold the Cyrus cylinder in your hands today, it would feel incredibly humble. It is no bigger than a football made of plain, baked earth. But the words pressed into that clay are some of the most beautiful and important words ever recorded. Cyrus announced that he was not a conqueror, but a liberator. He declared that all the captive people held in Babylon were free to go home. He told them to pack their belongings, gather the statues of their gods, and return to their homelands in peace. He gave the Jewish people the funds and the protection to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. More importantly, Cyrus declared that in his empire, no one would be forced to worship the Persian gods. He believed that the universe was vast enough and the sky was wide enough to hold everyone's prayers. You could speak your own language, bow to your own altar, and live your own life, as long as you paid your taxes and kept the peace. It was the first time in human history that a ruler had officially declared the concept of human rights and religious tolerance. Imagine the joy of those exiled people. Imagine the tears, the songs, the overwhelming feeling of packing a cart with your family's belongings. Not because you are being chased out, but because you are finally, truly allowed to go home. Imagine the rhythmic sound of thousands of sandals walking out of the gates of Babylon, heading back toward the sunset, their hearts lighter than they had been in generations. Cyrus had done the impossible. He had conquered the known world, from the edges of India to the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. And he had done it while making the world a gentler, kinder place. The empire was no longer a collection of chained kingdoms. It was a vast, diverse tapestry, held together by mutual respect and a shared desire for peace. But Cyrus, at his core, was still a man of the earth. He was still the boy from the mountains who loved the smell of the rain and the feel of the soil. Now that the world was finally quiet, now that the heavy work of uniting the nations was done, he didn't want to sit in a dark stone throne room in Babylon. He wanted to go home. He wanted to build something that wasn't a fortress, but a celebration of the life he had brought to the empire. He rode back toward the high plains of his childhood, to a place called Pasargadae. There, under the bright, clear blue sky of the Iranian plateau, Cyrus the Great took off his armor, put his hands into the warm earth, and began to plant a garden. Imagine the scene for a moment. The most powerful man in the known world, a king who had just redefined the map from the Mediterranean Sea to the mountains of India, was not sitting on a high throne barking orders. He was kneeling in the dust of the Iranian plateau. His hands, the same hands that had held the reins of a warhorse and accepted the surrender of Babylon, were now carefully packing soft, dark soil around the roots of a young fruit tree. To understand why Cyrus the Great chose to build a garden instead of a massive, intimidating fortress, We have to look at the very word itself. In the ancient Persian language, a walled garden was called a paradisa. It meant a protective enclosure, a safe space walled off from the harsh, unpredictable wilderness outside. When the Greeks later saw these incredible gardens, they borrowed the word and pronounced it paradisos. And that is exactly where we get our word, paradise. Cyrus was not just building a capital city at Pasargadae. He was trying to build a piece of paradise on earth. The location he chose was not an easy one. The Iranian plateau is a high, arid landscape. The sun beats down with a fierce, dry heat during the day, baking the earth until it cracks, and the winds can be relentless. It is a beautiful place, but it is entirely unforgiving. To look out at that dry, dusty plain and decide to build a lush, green, blossoming oasis is an act of supreme optimism. It is the ultimate statement that life, with a little care and a lot of patience, can absolutely flourish anywhere. To make this dream a reality, the Persians had to become masters of water. They could not rely on the rain, because the rain rarely came. Instead, they looked to the distant, snow-capped mountains. They developed a brilliant, almost magical system of underground aqueducts called qanats. Imagine the quiet, dedicated labor of the ancient engineers. They dug deep, sloping tunnels miles into the earth, tapping into the cold, pure aquifers at the base of the mountains. By keeping the water entirely underground, sheltered from the burning sun, they prevented it from evaporating. The water flowed silently through the dark earth for miles and miles, guided by nothing but a gentle, perfect slope, until it suddenly bubbled up right into the heart of Pasargadae. Close your eyes and listen to the sound of that water. It is not the roar of a dangerous rushing river. It is a gentle, continuous babbling. It is the rhythmic, musical sound of water flowing through shallow channels carved from pale, smooth limestone. These stone channels, called tubes, ran everywhere. They crisscrossed the grounds in perfect geometric lines, dividing the earth into 4 symmetrical quadrants. This design, known as the Chehar Bach, or fourfold garden, became the blueprint for almost every great garden in the world, from the Taj Mahal to the courtyards of Andalusia. It represented order, balance, and the harmony of the universe. Now imagine walking toward the walls of this ancient paradise. You have been traveling across the dusty, sun-baked plain for days. Your skin is hot, your throat is dry, and your eyes are tired from the glare of the desert sun. You approach a great stone gateway. As you step through the entrance, crossing the threshold from the wild world into the paradisa, the change is immediate and absolute. The very first thing that hits you is the temperature. The air inside the garden is a good 10 degrees cooler. It feels like stepping into a soft, welcoming shadow. The harsh glare of the sun is instantly filtered through the delicate, rustling leaves of 10,000 trees, painting the ground in a shifting, dancing mosaic of light and dark. Then you notice the scent. The air is thick and heavy, with the most incredible perfumes. You breathe in, and your lungs fill with the sweet, intoxicating smell of night-blooming jasmine and wild Persian roses. The rose is native to this land, and its scent is rich, velvety, and deeply relaxing. Mixed with the roses is the sharp, clean, uplifting aroma of citrus blossoms, lemon and bitter orange, carried on the gentle breeze. Beneath it all is the comforting, grounding smell of damp earth and crushed mint growing wild along the edges of the water channels. You walk slowly along the pathways, your sandals making a soft, rhythmic crunch on the fine gravel. Every step reveals a new shade of green. Cyrus did not just plant local trees. He treated his garden the same way he treated his empire. He brought different elements together and let them share the same soil. He sent messengers to the farthest corners of his vast territory, not to demand gold or silver, but to ask for seeds and saplings. And so, the garden became a living, breathing map of the peaceful world he had built. There were towering, majestic cedar trees, brought all the way from the misty mountains of Lebanon, standing like quiet, ancient guardians. There were sweet date palms from the hot sands of Egypt, their long fronds swaying lazily in the wind. There were olive trees from the shores of Lydia, and pomegranate trees with their vibrant, ruby-red blossoms brought down from the northern valleys. Think about the profound message of that garden. Cyrus was showing everyone who visited that different roots could share the exact same water. A tree from the east and a flower from the west could grow side by side, neither one choking out the other, both contributing to the beauty of the whole. It was a botanical masterpiece, but more importantly, it was a magnificent living metaphor for tolerance. There were no massive, overbearing palaces dominating the landscape here. The buildings at Pasargadae were light, airy pavilions with wide, open columns. They were designed not to lock the king inside, but to invite the garden in. You could sit on a soft woven rug in the shade of a stone portico and listen to the birds singing in the almond trees, while the cool breeze off the water channels brushed gently against your face. The Greeks, who usually viewed the Persians as strange and foreign, were absolutely obsessed with these gardens. Centuries later, Greek writers would still marvel at the fact that whenever the great Persian kings were not handling the heavy burdens of the state, they were out in their gardens, pruning the roses and checking the irrigation channels. There is something deeply comforting about that image. The idea that a ruler, capable of commanding millions, found his greatest peace in the simple, quiet act of helping a small green shoot emerge from the soil. It reminds us that underneath all the grand titles and the golden crowns, we're all just human beings who crave a quiet place to sit in the shade. As the afternoon slowly stretches into evening at Pasargadae, the light begins to change. The bright, sharp yellow of the sun softens into a rich, liquid gold. The shadows of the tall, slender cypress trees grow long, stretching across the manicured lawns like dark, pointing fingers. The heat of the day gently lifts, and the air becomes perfectly still. The birds begin their evening chorus, a soft, fluttering symphony settling into the branches for the night. You might see the king himself, dressed in simple, comfortable robes of spun linen, taking a slow, quiet walk along the water's edge. History tells us that Cyrus had a deep love for dogs, specifically the large, loyal hunting breeds of the region. You can picture him walking in the twilight, accompanied by a faithful, panting hound, enjoying the peaceful quiet of the paradise he had pulled from the dust. The sky above the garden slowly turns a deep, bruised purple. The first stars begin to prick through the fading light, reflecting like tiny, shimmering diamonds in the still water of the limestone channels. Inside the walls of the Paradisa, everything is safe, everything is calm. The scent of the blooming jasmine grows even stronger in the cool night air, acting like a natural lullaby for anyone lucky enough to be resting within the gates. But Cyrus knew that a king cannot stay in a garden forever. He had brought peace to the world, but peace is a delicate thing. It requires attention. It requires communication. He sat on a stone bench, looking out past the tops of the cedar trees, toward the great, dark expanse of his massive empire. From the snowy peaks of the Hindu Kush to the sparkling blue waters of the Aegean Sea, he ruled over millions of people, speaking dozens of different languages, living days and weeks of travel away from each other. How do you keep a family together when the house is so incredibly large? How do you ensure that a merchant in a distant province feels just as safe as a gardener resting in Pasargade. You have to connect them. You have to weave them together, just like the colorful threads of a mountain rug. You have to build something that binds the edges of the map to its center. The night fully settles over the garden. The only sound is the gentle, eternal trickling of the water. Outside the high walls of paradise, bathed in the soft, milky light of a rising moon, the desert plain stretches out into the darkness. And cutting straight through that darkness, beginning just outside the gates and running further than the eye can see, is a single, perfectly flattened path of packed earth. It is a long, sweeping ribbon connecting the ancient cities, quiet and empty for now, but waiting patiently for the sunrise and the rhythmic, drumming sound of approaching hooves as the first pale light of dawn begins to crack the horizon, painting the edge of the world in soft shades of apricot and lavender. The road slowly reveals itself. It is not just a simple dirt path winding aimlessly through the wilderness. This is the Royal Road, a magnificent, deliberate ribbon of packed, smoothed earth that stretches an astonishing 1,500 miles across the heart of the ancient world. Imagine standing right in the center of it as the sun rises. The ground beneath your feet is solid, cleared of heavy stones and treacherous roots. It is wide enough for chariots to pass each other with ease, and it runs all the way from the coastal city of Sardis, near the sparkling Aegean Sea in the west, straight to the magnificent gates of Susa in the east. In the ancient world, travel was usually a terrifying prospect. To leave the walls of your city meant stepping into the unknown. There were wild animals, treacherous mountain passes, completely unmapped deserts, and the ever-present threat of bandits hiding in the deep canyons. If you set out on a journey, there was a very real chance you might never be seen again. But the Persians, under the brilliant vision of their kings, changed all of that. They understood that an empire is not held together by invisible lines drawn on a map. An empire is held together by connection. It is held together by the ability of a mother in the mountains to send a message to her son in the capital. It is held together by the safe passage of a merchant carrying fragrant spices from the edges of India to the markets of the Mediterranean. And so they built the road. And more importantly, they made it incredibly, remarkably safe. Listen closely to the morning air. Over the gentle whistling of the wind, you can hear a steady, rhythmic sound growing louder in the distance. It is a fast, powerful drumming beat. Bardum, bardum, bardum. Over the crest of a low hill, a single rider appears, moving at a full, breathtaking gallop. This is a Piradazes, an imperial courier of the famous Persian postal system. He is riding one of those magnificent, deep-chested Nizan horses, its muscles working in perfect, fluid harmony as it eats up the miles of the road. The rider is dressed lightly, his face wrapped in a scarf to protect against the stinging dust. Tucked securely into a leather pouch slung across his chest is a sealed message. It might be an order from the king, a report from a distant governor, or perhaps a simple, quiet letter between friends. Imagine trying to deliver a message across 3 continents without a bicycle, let alone an email, a phone, or a satellite. Yet the Persians found a way that was so efficient, it became legendary. Centuries later, the Greek historian Herodotus would write about these riders with absolute awe. He wrote the famous words that still inspire postal services today. Neither snow nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. The rider does not slow down as he approaches a small, sturdy stone building sitting right on the edge of the road. This is a relay station. The Persians built one of these stations exactly every 15 miles along the entire length of the Royal Road. As the courier approaches, A man at the station hears the pounding of the hooves. Immediately, he brings out a fresh, rested, perfectly saddled horse. The arriving rider pulls hard on the reins, his horse sliding to a halt in a cloud of soft, golden dust. The horse is breathing heavily, its coat shining with sweat in the morning sun. Without saying a word, the rider swings his leg over the saddle, grabs his heavy leather pouch, and leaps onto the fresh horse. In less than a minute, he's off again, launching back into a full gallop, disappearing down the long, flat ribbon of the road. The tired horse is gently led away to be watered, brushed down, and fed sweet green hay, its job done for the day. This incredible, unbroken chain of fresh horses and dedicated riders meant that a message could travel across the entire 1,500-mile empire in just 7 days. It was a rhythm of movement that pulsed like a heartbeat through the ancient world, steady, reliable, and deeply comforting. But the royal road was not just for the speedy imperial couriers. As the day warms up and the sun climbs higher into the bright, clear blue sky, the road becomes a slow, colorful, and incredibly diverse river of humanity. Imagine standing by the side of the road now, sitting in the shade of a wide, ancient oak tree. You hear a different kind of sound approaching. It is much slower, much heavier. It is the deep, grinding crunch of heavy wooden wagon wheels and the low, soft padding of large, calloused feet. A great merchant caravan is making its way east. First, you see the camels. These are massive, magnificent Bactrian camels, with their thick, shaggy coats and 2 great humps. They walk with a swaying, hypnotic rhythm, like ships rolling on a gentle ocean. Tied around their thick necks are heavy bronze bells. Clink, clonk, clink, clonk. It is a slow, sleepy, musical sound that announces their arrival long before you can see them through the heat haze. Walking alongside the camels and the heavy, oxen-drawn carts are the merchants themselves. This is where you truly see the magic of the Persian Empire. Because the road is completely safe, guarded by imperial soldiers who regularly patrol the route, anyone can travel. You see Greek traders wrapped in simple woolen cloaks, carrying beautifully painted pottery and rich olive oil. You see Indians dressed in brightly colored, incredibly soft cotton, transporting heavy, fragrant bundles of cinnamon, cardamom, and black pepper. You see Egyptians with intricate jewelry, carrying rolls of delicate papyrus. They are all walking the exact same road, sharing the same water from the roadside wells, and resting under the same wide, open sky. There is a quiet, unspoken camaraderie among these travelers. They do not share a native language, and they worship completely different gods. But out here on the road, they share the exact same journey. They share the same blisters on their feet, the same thirst in the afternoon heat, and the same deep relief when the sun finally begins to set. As the afternoon shadows stretch out and the heat of the day finally begins to break, a collective sigh of relief seems to ripple through the caravan. The travelers shade their eyes and look ahead. There, shimmering in the golden, dusty light of the late afternoon, is a massive square building rising out of the empty plain. This is a caravanserai. A caravanserai was a massive, fortified rest stop built specifically for travelers, merchants, and their animals. It was a sanctuary in the wilderness. Imagine the feeling of being a weary merchant. You have been walking for 14 hours. Your legs ache, your lips are cracked from the dry wind, and your shoulders are heavy. Then you reach the towering wooden gates of the caravanserai. As you step through the cool, dark archway and into the massive central courtyard, the harshness of the outside world simply vanishes. The courtyard is enormous, open to the sky, and bustling with a gentle, organized energy. In the center is a large stone fountain, pouring fresh, clean water into a wide basin, The sound of the splashing water is the most beautiful music in the world to a thirsty traveler. The animals are immediately led to the lower levels, where there are clean, spacious stables filled with fresh straw and long troughs of cool water. The camels kneel down with a heavy, contented groan, finally relieved of their heavy packs. For the human travelers, there are dozens of small, safe, elevated rooms built into the thick stone walls surrounding the courtyard. You find your room, drop your heavy leather pack onto the floor, and take off your dusty sandals. The stone floor is wonderfully cool against your bare, tired feet. As the sky above the courtyard turns a deep, twilight purple, small oil lamps are lit, casting a warm, flickering golden glow over the stone walls. The smells rising from the courtyard are absolutely intoxicating. In the corners, cooks are working over open fires. The rich, heavy scent of roasting lamb mixes with the sweet aroma of saffron, baking flatbread and pots of thick, bubbling lentil stew. Travelers gather around the fires in small groups. This is the ancient equivalent of a cozy roadside diner. You hear the low, soft murmur of a dozen different languages blending together in the night air. A Greek merchant is using his hands to excitedly describe the size of a ship to an Egyptian trader, while an Indian traveler quietly shares a small pouch of rare, sweet candied ginger with a Persian guard. There are no complex politics here. There is no war. There is only the shared, simple humanity of resting after a long day's work. It is a moment of pure, uninterrupted peace. After a warm, heavy meal, you climb the stone steps back to your small room. You lie down on a thick, soft woolen rug, pulling a woven blanket over your shoulders. The thick stone walls of the caravanserai block out the wind of the open plains entirely. You are perfectly, completely safe. Outside the heavy wooden gates, the Empire's guards are awake, keeping watch under the bright silver light of a million stars. Inside, the only sounds are the gentle crackling of the dying cooking fires, the soft, rhythmic chewing of the horses in the stables below, and the slow, deep breathing of hundreds of travelers sleeping soundly. As you close your eyes and let the exhaustion drain from your muscles, you realize something profound. This incredible feeling of safety, this perfectly organized road, this massive sheltering building, none of this happened by accident. It is the result of a vast, unseen, incredibly complex system working perfectly in the background. The gardens of Pasargadae showed the heart of the empire, but the royal road shows its brilliant, organized mind. Someone had to measure the miles. Someone had to design the relay stations. Someone had to figure out how to pay the guards, how to feed the horses, and how to make millions of different people feel perfectly secure in a terrifying world. While Cyrus the Great planted the seeds of the empire, it was another man entirely who built the intricate, beautiful machinery that kept it running. A man who loved order, who loved balance, and who believed that a peaceful world was an organized world. As the travelers sleep deeply in the quiet dark of the caravanserai, the administrative heart of the empire beats steadily on, guided by the precise, masterful hand of Darius the Great. To understand Darius, we must first understand the deep, soothing comfort of order. If Cyrus the Great was the visionary gardener who planted the seeds of the empire, Darius was the master architect who built the walls, laid the paths, and made sure the water flowed to every single tree. Imagine waking up in a world where everything simply works. There is no confusion. There is no sudden chaos. You know exactly what the rules are. You know that the roads are safe, and you know that tomorrow will be just as stable as today. In the ancient world, which was so often ruled by the unpredictable whims of angry kings and the sudden violence of invading armies, this kind of predictability was not just rare, it was a miracle. It was the ultimate form of relaxation for the mind. Darius was a man who looked at the vast, sprawling, incredibly diverse tapestry of the Persian Empire, a territory that stretched from the snowy mountains of Eastern Europe all the way to the lush, humid valleys of the Indus River. And he did not feel overwhelmed. Where others might see an impossible puzzle of 50 different languages, hundreds of different gods, and thousands of miles of rugged terrain, Darius saw a beautiful equation waiting to be balanced. His mind was like a grand, quiet library. Everything had its place. Everything had a purpose. Let us step inside the administrative heart of his empire. Imagine walking away from the bright, noisy heat of a city street and stepping into the royal archives of Susa. The transition is instantly calming. The air inside these thick, mud brick walls is wonderfully cool and completely still. The bright sunlight is filtered through narrow windows near the ceiling, casting long, soft, diagonal beams of dusty light across the room. The first thing you notice is the smell. It is not the smell of incense or roasting meat. It is the earthy, grounding scent of wet river clay and dried reeds. All around you, sitting on soft woven cushions on the cool stone floor, are the royal scribes. They are the quiet, diligent heartbeats of the empire. There is no shouting here. There is only a gentle, continuous, deeply hypnotic rhythm. Listen closely to the sound of their work. It is a soft, satisfying press, pull, press, pull. In their left hand, they hold a small, smooth, damp pillow of clay, freshly gathered from the riverbanks and kneaded until it is entirely free of stones. It feels cool and heavy in the palm. In their right hand, they hold a stylus, a small, carefully carved piece of reed with a wedge-shaped tip. With incredible speed and delicate precision, they press the stylus into the soft clay, making tiny geometric marks. This is cuneiform, one of the oldest writing systems in the world. They do not write sweeping, messy letters. They stamp perfect, tiny triangles and lines into the earth. It looks like the delicate tracks of a small bird walking across wet sand. These scribes were translating the will of the king into a language that everyone could understand. Because the empire was so large, Darius knew that forcing everyone to speak Persian would only cause resentment and confusion. So, he chose a different path. He elevated a language called Aramaic to be the administrative voice of the empire. Aramaic was simple, it had an easy alphabet, and it was already spoken by merchants from Egypt to Babylon. Imagine the beautiful harmony of this system. A decree from Darius would be spoken in Old Persian. The scribes would immediately write it down, translating it perfectly into Elamite, Babylonian, and Aramaic. Then, those fast-riding couriers on the royal road would carry those clay tablets to the furthest corners of the map. When the message arrived in a distant province, local scribes would read the Aramaic and translate it out loud into the local tongue, whether that was Greek, Egyptian, or Hebrew. It was a massive, silent, perfectly oiled machine of communication. Everyone was heard. Everyone was included. The anxiety of being misunderstood simply melted away. But Darius did not just harmonize the languages. He wanted to harmonize the very way people lived their daily lives. He turned his brilliant, organized mind toward the bustling, chaotic marketplaces of the ancient world. Before Darius, trying to buy something in a foreign market could be an incredibly stressful experience. Imagine you're a merchant from the mountains of Anatolia, and you have traveled all the way to Babylon to sell your beautifully woven wool rugs. You find a buyer who wants to trade for a sack of fine Egyptian linen. But how do you know the trade is fair? There was no standard money. People traded with strange, heavy lumps of silver or rings of copper. If a buyer handed you a chunk of silver, You had to guess its purity. You had to pull out your own scales, which might be different from his scales, and argue about the weight. You might have to use a chisel to hack off a tiny piece of the silver if the chunk was too heavy. It was a loud, anxious, time-consuming process, built on a foundation of suspicion. Darius watched this anxiety, and he smoothed it away with a single, brilliant invention. He introduced the daric. The daric was a coin. But it was not just any coin. It was a masterpiece of trust. Imagine holding an ancient daric in the palm of your hand. It is made of solid, impossibly pure gold. It feels wonderfully heavy, carrying a dense, satisfying weight that grounds you. The metal is warm to the touch, shining with a soft, buttery yellow glow that never tarnishes, no matter how many hands it passes through. Stamped onto the front of the coin is an image of the great king himself, kneeling with a bow in his hand. But the true beauty of the daric was not its artwork. It was its absolute, unwavering consistency. Darius made sure that every single gold daric minted in the empire weighed exactly the same amount. The purity was strictly controlled. Think about the profound relaxation this brought to the world. A Greek sailor stepping off a boat in Egypt could hand a gold daric to a local baker, and the baker would accept it instantly, without a scale, without a second thought, and without a single argument. The heavy, anxious burden of distrust was entirely removed from daily life. The simple, delightful clink of a gold coin dropping into a leather pouch became the universal sound of a fair, peaceful agreement. To go along with his new coins, Darius standardized all the weights and measures across the empire. He introduced a standard weight called the kasha. He had master craftsmen carve perfectly smooth, heavy bells out of dark, polished limestone and green diorite. These weights were sent to every marketplace. Imagine walking through a Persian bazaar now. The harsh shouting and the stressful arguments are gone. Instead, there is a low, pleasant hum of friendly conversation. You see a spice merchant carefully pouring fragrant, deep red saffron onto one side of a beautiful brass balance scale. On the other side, he places a perfectly smooth, dark stone weight, a royal kasha. The brass scale tips gently, silently, and comes to a perfect, completely level rest. There is an incredible, deep comfort in fairness. When the rules are clear, and when everyone is treated to the exact same standard, the shoulders drop, the jaw unclenches. People can simply go about their lives, tending to their families and their crafts, knowing that the ground beneath their feet is solid and true. Darius was building an environment where human potential could flourish, because the basic anxieties of survival and trade had been solved. He even looked beyond the land, turning his eyes toward the vast blue oceans. He looked at a map of his empire and noticed a frustrating barrier. The rich, fertile lands of Egypt, with their endless fields of wheat and papyrus, were separated from the bustling trade routes of the Red Sea by a stretch of harsh, unforgiving desert. To move goods between the two required unloading ships, packing heavy bags onto the backs of tired camels, and walking for days through the scorching heat, only to reload everything onto new ships on the other side. It was inefficient. It was difficult. And Darius did not like things that were difficult. So, with the same calm, deliberate ambition that built the Royal Road, he ordered his engineers to do something that seems almost impossibly modern. He told them to dig a canal. More than 2,000 years before the modern Suez Canal was built, the workers of Darius the Great carved a gentle, flowing waterway through the desert, connecting the sweet waters of the Nile River directly to the salty waves of the Red Sea. Imagine standing on the sandy banks of that ancient canal as the sun begins to set, turning the slow-moving water into a river of liquid copper. The evening breeze is soft and warm. You hear the deep, rhythmic groaning of heavy wooden oars and the slow, majestic creaking of thick ropes. A massive trading ship, its wide linen sails catching the last light of the day, is gliding silently past you. It is carrying fragrant cedar wood from Lebanon, fine purple dyes from the Mediterranean, and heavy jars of olive oil, sailing straight through the desert toward the shores of India. The sailors on the deck are resting, leaning against the wooden rails, watching the stars begin to appear over the silent sand dunes. They don't have to unload their cargo. They don't have to face the heat of the desert. They can simply sail on, carried safely by the brilliant, organized mind of the great king. Everywhere you looked in the Persian Empire under Darius, you saw this kind of thoughtful, deliberate care. He divided the massive territory into 20 organized provinces, called satrapies. He appointed governors, called satraps, who acted as local protectors. He fixed the tax rates so that they were fair and predictable, based on what each specific region could easily afford to give, rather than demanding impossible tributes that would leave the people starving. The empire was humming. It was a vast, incredibly complex instrument, and Darius had carefully, patiently tuned every single string until it played a perfect, harmonious chord. From the quiet scratching of the scribe's styluses in Susa, to the gentle clinking of gold coins in a Babylonian market, to the slow, steady splash of oars in the Egyptian canal, the world was at peace. It was a golden age of stability, a time when a person could plant a tree and genuinely believe that their grandchildren would sit safely in its shade. But Darius, ever the builder, was not entirely satisfied. He had organized the laws, he had organized the money, he had organized the roads. But he knew that humans are visual creatures. We need more than just abstract concepts of fairness and invisible borders. We need something we can touch. We need a physical place that embodies the spirit of our shared world. He wanted to build a monument. But unlike the pharaohs of Egypt, who built massive, silent tombs for the dead, or the Assyrian kings, who built terrifying fortresses to intimidate the living, Darius wanted to build something entirely different. He wanted to build a stage, a grand, breathtaking, welcoming pavilion made of stone, built not to wage war, but to host the greatest, most peaceful celebration the world had ever seen. He wanted a place where all the 50 nations of his empire could gather, not as conquered subjects, but as honored guests under a single starry sky. He looked toward the stark, beautiful, jagged cliffs of the Zagros Mountains, to a place the Persians simply called Parsa, a place resting at the foot of the mountain of mercy. It was time to lay the first stones of Persepolis. To the ancient Persians, it was simply known as Parsa, the city of the Persians. But when the Greeks eventually saw it, they were so entirely overwhelmed by its scale and its beauty that they named it Persepolis. Imagine, for a moment, that you are traveling across the vast, flat, marve-dashed plain in the late afternoon. The journey has been long, the sun has been warm, and the rhythmic swaying of your carriage has lulled you into a deep, comfortable drowsiness. You open your eyes and look toward the east. There, rising out of the flat, dusty earth, is the dark, jagged silhouette of the Zagros Mountains. And nestled right at the base of a particularly rugged peak, a peak known beautifully as the Mountain of Mercy, is something that looks like a dream. It is a massive, artificial terrace built right into the side of the mountain. It does not look like a fortress. Fortresses are built with high, blank, terrifying walls designed to keep people out. This terrace is different. It is wide, open, and inviting, completely bathed in the warm, honey-colored light of the setting sun. Before we walk up to those incredible ruins, we must pause to appreciate exactly how this place was built. Throughout ancient history, when a king wanted to build a massive monument, whether it was the pyramids of Egypt or the ziggurats of Babylon, the story was usually one of sorrow. The heavy stones were almost always pulled by the exhausted, aching muscles of slaves, forced to work under the crack of a whip. But Darius the Great, the master organizer, the man who brought the gold daric and the balanced scales to the world, refused to build his masterpiece on a foundation of suffering. He believed that a city designed to celebrate peace must be built peacefully. In the cool, quiet archives of Persepolis, archaeologists have found thousands of small, baked clay tablets. These are not grand declarations of war. They are something much more beautiful. They are ancient payroll records. When you look at these little clay tablets, you realize that every single person who worked on Persepolis was paid. They were free men and women, traveling from every corner of the vast empire to offer their skills. There were stonemasons from Ionia, woodworkers from Sardis, and goldsmiths from Media. They were paid generously in silver, in rich, dark wine, in roasted meat, and in fine grain. The tablets even show that women who were pregnant or had recently given birth received extra rations and paid time off to care for their babies. Imagine the atmosphere of that ancient construction site. It wasn't a place of fear. It was a place of vibrant, collaborative energy. Close your eyes and listen to the sounds echoing off the Mountain of Mercy. You hear the sharp, rhythmic clink, clink, clink of iron chisels carving into the dark grey limestone. You hear the deep, humming songs of the workers, sharing melodies from a dozen different homelands as they pull the massive stone blocks into place, using cleverly designed pulleys and thick ropes. You smell the incredibly sweet, rich scent of freshly cut Lebanese cedar wood, transported all the way from the Mediterranean coast, mingling with the earthy smell of stone dust and the savory aroma of cooking fires preparing the workers' evening meals. It took more than 60 years to finish Persepolis. Darius started it, his son Xerxes continued it, and his grandson Artaxerxes added to it. It was a multi-generational project of love, a beautiful, evolving canvas of stone. Now, the sun is beginning to dip behind you, casting long, soft shadows across the plain. It is time to enter the city. You approach the base of the massive terrace. Above you, sitting on top of the 40-foot-high stone wall, are the delicate, towering columns of the palaces. To get there, you must climb the grand staircase. But this is not just any staircase. Most ancient staircases were steep, narrow, and exhausting. But Darius understood human nature. He knew that Persepolis was going to host the greatest dignitaries, kings, and nobles from across the world. And let us be honest, it is very difficult to look royal, elegant, and dignified if you're completely out of breath, sweating, and clutching your knees after climbing a steep flight of stairs. So, the architects designed something absolutely brilliant. They built a magnificent, double-ramped staircase that is astonishingly wide enough for a group of 10 people to walk up side by side, shoulder to shoulder, while comfortably continuing their conversation. But the true genius is in the height of the steps. Each step is incredibly shallow, rising only a few inches off the ground. Imagine placing your foot on the first step. The stone is a beautifully polished, dark grey limestone, still holding the warmth of the afternoon sun. As you begin to climb, you don't have to lift your knees high. You don't have to push hard against gravity. The ascent is so gentle, so unbelievably gradual, that it feels less like climbing and more like gliding. You can picture the ancient guests, draped in heavy, intricately woven silk robes, slowly walking up these stairs. The shallow steps naturally force you to slow down. They force you to adopt a calm, majestic, sweeping pace. Step, pause, step, pause. With every shallow step you take, your breathing slows down. Your heart rate settles into a steady, peaceful rhythm. The grand staircase of Persepolis is, quite literally, a physical transition. It is designed to physically calm you down, to wash away the stress and the dust of the long journey, so that by the time you reach the top of the terrace, you are completely relaxed and ready to be a guest. You reach the final step. You are now standing on the great stone platform, looking out over the world. The view of the Marv-dashed plain stretching out to the horizon is breathtaking. The air up here is cooler, carrying a soft, sweeping breeze that rustles the fabrics of your clothing. You turn away from the view and look straight ahead. Towering in front of you is a building that makes your heart skip a gentle beat. This is the entrance. It is aptly, beautifully named the Gate of All Nations. It is a massive, square pavilion made of perfectly fitted stone. The wooden doors that once hung here were towering structures of thick cedar, heavily plated in shining bronze. But you don't even notice where the doors used to be, because your eyes are instantly drawn to the guardians of the gate. Standing on either side of the entrance, carved directly into the massive stone pillars, are two colossal creatures. These are the Lamassu. They are mythological guardians, standing over 18 feet tall. They have the muscular, powerful bodies of great bulls, the magnificent, sweeping wings of eagles, and the calm, bearded, incredibly wise faces of human men. In other ancient cultures, giant statues at the gates of a city were usually depicted doing something violent, crushing enemies, or holding terrifying weapons. They were meant to scream, "Be afraid of our power." But look closely at the Lamassu of Persepolis. They hold no weapons. Their faces are not twisted in anger or ferocity. They look out over the plain with a serene, knowing, and deeply protective expression. Their eyes are wide and gentle. They're not here to keep you out. They are here to keep the chaos out. They stand as quiet, eternal bouncers of the ancient world, ensuring that whoever passes between them leaves their weapons, their anger, and their prejudices behind. Carved high above these magnificent guardians, etched perfectly into the stone in 3 different languages, is a welcoming message from the great king. It reads in part, "By the grace of the divine, I built this gate of all nations." Much other good construction was built within this city, which is beautiful. It is a simple, honest statement. I built this, and it is beautiful. You walk slowly past the Lamassu, tracing your hand lightly over the cool, deeply carved feathers of their stone wings. You pass through the gate and step onto a wide, sweeping avenue. The ground is paved with smooth, perfectly fitted blocks of stone. As you walk further into the heart of Persepolis, you realize something truly unique about this place. Most ancient cities were cramped. They were chaotic, loud, and built on top of themselves in a messy jumble of mud brick houses and winding dark alleyways. Persepolis is entirely different. It feels incredibly open. It feels light. It is a city of vast, empty spaces, wide courtyards, and grand, airy pavilions. It does not feel like a heavy fortress of stone. It feels like a sprawling, luxurious campsite. And that is exactly what it was meant to be. Remember, the Persians were originally nomads. They loved their massive woven tents. They loved the feeling of the open sky and the breeze flowing through their homes. When they finally decided to build a city of stone, they simply translated the architecture of the tent into marble and limestone. You approach the grandest building on the entire terrace. It is called the Apadana, the great audience hall of the king. To call it a hall almost feels like an insult to its scale. It is a vast, elevated platform, and standing on it are 72 impossibly tall, incredibly slender columns. These columns stretch an astonishing 60 feet into the air. They are so thin and elegant that they look less like stone pillars and more like the trunks of a towering ancient forest. Imagine walking into the center of the Apadana. You tilt your head back and look up. At the very top of each column, carrying the weight of the massive roof, are beautifully carved stone capitals, shaped like the heads of gentle bulls or powerful resting lions. The roof itself was an absolute marvel. It was made entirely of massive beams of Lebanese cedar wood. The wood was so rich in natural oils that even today, thousands of years after the city fell, archaeologists sometimes report catching a faint, lingering scent of cedar when they dig in the ruins. When the Apadana was completely intact, it must have been a deeply sensory experience. The floor was covered in the thickest, softest, most vibrant wool rugs the empire could weave. The walls were hung with massive, brilliantly colored tapestries that depicted gardens, stars, and marching animals. These tapestries were not just decorative. They acted as ancient soundproofing. They absorbed the echoes of the stone, turning the acoustics of this massive hall into a soft, hushed, intimate whisper. As the evening breeze blew across the terrace, it would catch the heavy silk curtains that hung between the great columns, making them billow and sway like the fabric of a giant breathing tent. You stand in the center of the Apadana, surrounded by this forest of stone and the soft whispering of the wind. The sky above is turning a deep, rich indigo. The stars are beginning to bloom over the Zagros Mountains. This city was completely empty for most of the year. The great kings of Persia still preferred to move with the seasons, spending their winters in the warm plains of Susa or Babylon, and their summers in the cool heights of Ecbatana. Persepolis was too remote, too high up in the mountains to be a practical, everyday capital. So why build it? Why pour millions of hours of skilled labor, mountains of silver, and forests of cedar into a city that sat empty for 9 months of the year? Because Persepolis was not built for administration. It was not built for war. It was built for a single, magical moment in time. It was a stage perfectly set for the greatest, most peaceful party the ancient world had ever known. As the long, cold winter finally begins to break, and the first soft green shoots of spring push their way through the thawing earth of the Mavdasht plain, the quiet, empty city of Persepolis begins to wake up. The royal road is suddenly filled with a different kind of traffic. The couriers and the merchants step aside as massive, incredibly colorful processions begin to arrive from every single corner of the mapped world. They're not coming to pay a bitter tribute to a conqueror. They are coming to celebrate the turning of the earth. They are coming for Nowruz, the ancient, joyous festival of the new year. And as the sun rises on the first day of spring, the gate of all nations is about to swing wide open. Imagine that perfectly crisp, incredibly fresh morning air that only happens on the very first day of spring. The long, heavy silence of winter has finally broken. The earth is softening. The snows on the Zagros Mountains are beginning to melt into clear, singing streams, and the world feels as though it is taking one massive collective breath of relief. This is the time of the spring equinox. It is a deeply sacred moment in the ancient Persian calendar, a day when the light and the dark are in absolute perfect balance. It is Nowruz, the new day. As the first golden rays of the sun crest the mountain of mercy, they strike the massive stone columns of Persepolis, turning the pale gray limestone into a warm, glowing amber. The city is no longer empty. The vast Mavdasht plain, Below the Great Terrace is entirely covered with thousands of beautiful, colorful woven tents. It looks like a massive field of incredibly vibrant wildflowers that has sprouted overnight. Listen to the sounds drifting up from the plain. It is a gentle, joyous, humming ocean of life. You can hear the soft nickering of thousands of horses, the low, rumbling groans of camels, and the beautiful, chaotic symphony of dozens of different languages blending together in the cool morning air. Today's the day the king invites the world into his home. You stand near the top of the grand, double-ramped staircase. Below you, the great procession begins. But this is not a military parade. There are no shackled prisoners, no chained captives dragging their feet in sorrow. This is a gathering of guests. It is the ancient world's greatest family reunion. Slowly, gracefully, the delegations from the 23 nations of the empire begin to ascend the shallow stone steps. Because the stairs are so low, their pace is incredibly measured, rhythmic, and incredibly calming to watch. They move like a slow, colorful river flowing upward toward the sky. If you look closely at the carved stone walls lining the staircase today, you can still see the exact portraits of these ancient people, captured forever in limestone. But on this morning, the stone has come to life. First come the Medes, the close cousins of the Persians. They wear elegant, flowing tunics, tailored to perfectly fit their bodies, and round felt caps to keep the morning chill away. They walk side by side with the Persian nobles. In the stone carvings, you can actually see them holding hands or gently touching each other on the shoulder, a beautiful, eternal symbol of friendship and absolute trust between equals. Behind them, the colors begin to shift and dazzle. Here come the delegates from the faraway lands of India. They are dressed in impossibly fine, sheer cotton that catches the morning breeze, dyed in brilliant shades of turmeric yellow and the deepest, richest indigo. They walk barefoot, their steps light and silent on the stone. They lead beautiful, small-eared donkeys carrying heavy woven baskets that smell strongly of black pepper, sweet cardamom, and warm cinnamon. The scent of those spices wafts up the stairs, filling your lungs with the intoxicating aroma of distant tropical forests. Next are the Bactrians from the harsh, beautiful deserts of Central Asia. They wear thick, warm trousers and heavy embroidered coats. They are leading magnificent two-humped camels. The camels walk with a slow, swaying, hypnotic rhythm, their large, soft feet making a gentle padding sound against the polished stairs. Around the camels' necks are heavy bronze bells that ring with a low, sleepy clonk. Clonk. Clonk with every step. Then come the Ethiopians, representing the southernmost edge of the known world. They are tall, proud, and dressed in the soft skins of panthers and lions. They carry vessels filled with precious, pure gold dust that glimmers like captured sunlight. And they lead a gentle, curious creature, perhaps an okapi or a small giraffe, something the people of the mountains have never seen before, bringing gasps of quiet wonder from the gathered crowds. There are the Lydians, carrying beautifully crafted metal vases. The Armenians leading magnificent high-stepping horses with incredibly braided manes. The Egyptians carrying bundles of fine papyrus and beautifully woven linen. All of them are walking up the same stairs. All of them are breathing the same sweet spring air. As they pass through the gate of all nations, under the calm, watchful eyes of the great winged bulls, they step into the vast, open courtyards of Persepolis. The sheer scale of the city makes the massive crowd feel perfectly comfortable. There is no pushing. There is no rushing. The architecture itself demands that you take your time. They slowly make their way toward the upper dana, the great audience hall. The 72 towering columns seem to reach all the way to the clouds. Between the columns, massive curtains of thick, rich purple silk are hung. The breeze catches the heavy silk, making it ripple and sway with a soft, deeply soothing swoosh, like the sound of distant waves washing onto a sandy shore. Inside the hall, the atmosphere is hushed and reverent, but it is not fearful. The floor is covered in a carpet so large and so thick that it feels like walking on a soft layer of moss in a quiet forest. The air inside the Upadana is wonderfully cool, scented with the smoke of pure frankincense and myrrh, burning gently in tall, bronze braziers. At the far end of the hall, sitting on an elevated wooden chair, is the great king. He does not wear heavy armor. He is not holding a sword. He is dressed in sweeping robes of deep crimson and gold, and in his hand he gently holds a single, blooming lotus flower. The lotus is a symbol of eternity, of peace, and of the sweet fragrance of life. As each delegation approaches, they do not throw themselves face down on the floor in terror. They bow respectfully, placing a hand to their lips in a gentle gesture of blowing a kiss, a traditional Persian greeting of deep respect. The king smiles, smells the lotus flower, and accepts their gifts. These gifts are not taxes. The empire has a highly organized tax system, yes, but Nowruz is different. This is a day for cultural pride. Each nation brings the very best of what their homeland can produce. It is a way of saying, look at the beauty we can add to the world. The king, in return, hosts a feast that is truly beyond imagination. Imagine the transition as the official greetings conclude. The formal silence of the hall slowly gives way to the warm, bubbling sound of celebration. Massive wooden tables are brought out into the open courtyards, set beneath the shade of the grand, cedar-roofed porticos. The Feast of Nowruz is a celebration of the earth's generosity. There are mountains of warm, soft flatbread, baked just moments ago in clay ovens. There are great silver bowls filled with thick, sweet honey, gathered from the wild mountain bees. There are platters of roasted almonds, bright green pistachios, and sweet, sticky dates. There are tender cuts of lamb, slow roasted over completely smokeless fires of sweet-smelling wood, seasoned with the very spices the Indian delegation just carried up the stairs. And then there is the wine. The Persians were famous for their wine, poured from incredibly beautiful golden vessels shaped like the heads of ibexes and gazelles. The wine is poured into shallow, wide silver bowls. When you hold the bowl in your hands, the silver is cool, but the wine brings a soft, spreading warmth to your chest, relaxing your shoulders and softening the edges of the day. As the afternoon slowly melts away, the light in Persepolis turns from a bright, clear blue into a rich, heavy gold. The shadows of the towering columns stretch out across the smooth stone floors, acting like massive sundials marking the passage of a perfect day. The air fills with music. It is not the loud, crashing music of war drums. It is the soft, intricate, completely mesmerizing music of the ancient world. You hear the delicate plucking of the barbat, an ancient lute with a deep wooden belly that produces a warm, rounded tone. You hear the whispering, breathy sound of the ney, a simple reed flute that mimics the sound of the wind blowing through the mountain passes. The musicians sit on woven rugs, their eyes closed, losing themselves in the complex, flowing melodies that seem to spiral up toward the cedar roof and out into the open sky. People from entirely different worlds sit together under the porticos. A weaver from Babylon shares a bowl of dates with a horseman from Bactria. They cannot speak the same language, but they communicate through the universal language of shared food, shared music, and shared peace. They nod to one another, smiling, pointing to the incredible architecture, leaning back against the cool stone walls and simply enjoying the feeling of being entirely safe. This is the true masterpiece of the Persian Empire. It wasn't the size of their army or the wealth in their treasuries. It was the ability to take the incredibly diverse, beautifully chaotic tapestry of human existence and weave it into a single, peaceful afternoon. As the sun finally begins to set behind the Zagros Mountains, the sky turns a brilliant, bruising purple, streaked with clouds of burning pink and soft orange. The light over the Marv-dashed plain begins to fade, but Persepolis does not go dark. Hundreds of large, shallow bronze bowls are filled with pure, fragrant oil. As the first stars begin to prick through the twilight, the fires are lit. The flames are incredibly steady, casting a warm, dancing, golden glow against the polished stone of the upper Dana. The city glows like a beacon of warmth in the cool mountain night. The festival of Nowruz will last for many days. There will be more feasting, more music, and more quiet conversations under the stars. But eventually, the spring will turn to summer. The delegates will pack their colorful tents, load their camels and their horses, and begin the long, slow, safe journey back down the royal road, returning to their distant homes. Persepolis will once again become quiet, left to the care of the guards and the gentle mountain wind. The great king will move his court down into the valleys, seeking the shade. But even when the grand festivals end, the incredible comfort of the empire continues. Because true relaxation isn't just found in massive celebrations. It is found in the quiet, completely ordinary moments of a peaceful life. It is found in the objects you use every day, the clothes you wear, and the spaces where you choose to close your eyes. Away from the towering columns and the monumental staircases, the people of the ancient empire retreated into their homes, surrounding themselves with the quiet, intricate, and deeply comforting luxuries of daily life. The grand monuments of kings are magnificent, but true peace is rarely found in a throne room. It is found at home. Let us step away from the royal courts, leave the monumental stone staircases behind, and walk through the winding, sun-baked streets of an ordinary ancient Persian city during the long, lazy hours of a late summer afternoon. The streets here are intentionally narrow, designed by clever architects to cast long, cooling shadows over the pathways. The high outer walls of the houses are made of thick, earthy mud brick, baked hard by the sun. From the outside, these homes look entirely plain, offering no hint of what lies behind them. The ancient world was a public, bustling place, so a home was designed to be the ultimate private sanctuary, a fortress of quiet. Pass your hand over the rough, warm texture of a heavy wooden door. Push it gently open and step across the threshold. The environment transforms instantly. The noise of the dusty street, the calling of merchants, the clattering of wooden cartwheels is suddenly cut off, muffled perfectly by the thick earthen walls. You find yourself standing in a central courtyard, a private hidden oasis, open only to the sky above. In the very center of this courtyard sits a small, shallow geometric pool lined with smooth blue tiles. A delicate fountain bubbles softly in the middle. The sound of water is always present here, a continuous, gentle trickle that acts as a natural, soothing melody for the household. Surrounding the pool are small, carefully tended fruit trees, perhaps a pomegranate tree heavy with red fruit, or a sweet lemon tree offering its bright, citrus scent to the still air. To escape the peak heat of the afternoon, you step out of the courtyard and into the main living quarters. The transition is wonderful. The rooms are cool, dim, and incredibly inviting. Look down at the floor. In an ancient Persian home, the floor was never left as bare stone or cold, packed earth. It was covered in the true, enduring masterpiece of their culture, the woven carpet. The people of this empire took the simple, practical skill of weaving goat hair to keep the rain out of a nomadic tent, and they elevated it into an absolute art form. Step out of your sandals and walk barefoot across the room. The feeling of the thick, tightly spun sheep's wool beneath your feet is deeply grounding. It is soft, yielding slightly to your weight, holding the faint, clean scent of natural lanolin. These rugs were not made in a few hours. They were the result of months, sometimes years of quiet, meditative labor. Notice the astonishing complexity of the patterns beneath your toes. The weavers worked at large wooden looms, their fingers moving with a practiced, rhythmic grace, tying thousands upon thousands of microscopic knots. They used the absolute best of nature to bring these floors to life. They harvested the roots of the madder plant to create rich, passionate reds. They ground the shells of walnuts to spin deep, earthy browns, and they traded for precious indigo to weave borders as blue as the midnight sky. When you sit down on one of these carpets, surrounded by intricately woven geometric flowers and running stags, you are essentially sitting in a portable garden. Even in the dead of winter, when the trees outside are bare, the floor inside remains eternally in bloom. Resting against the walls of the room are low, intricately carved cedar chests containing the household's clothing. The Persians loved physical comfort, and this showed beautifully in the way they dressed. Before them, many ancient cultures wore garments that were essentially large, heavy rectangles of wool, simply draped and pinned over the shoulders. It was practical, but it was restrictive. The Persians, however, were born horse riders. You cannot comfortably ride a horse for 50 miles in a draped skirt. So, they gave the world an incredibly cozy invention: the tailored trouser. They crafted trousers that were loose, flowing, and incredibly soft, tying gently at the waist and the ankles. Paired with a long, beautifully embroidered tunic, their clothing allowed for complete freedom of movement. Feel the fabric resting in the wooden chest. It is woven from the finest linen, grown in the damp soils of Egypt, and spun so thinly it feels almost weightless. And hiding beneath the linen, neatly folded, is something completely new to the Western world. It is a small square of fabric that feels smoother than water. It is early silk, carried step by step across the mountains of Asia by tired merchants, arriving here to be traded for its weight in gold. Slipping into these garments at the end of a long day feels like a physical sigh of relief, the fabrics catching every slight breeze that drifts through the open windows. As the afternoon sun begins to lower, casting golden light through the wooden shutters, the heat of the day lingers in the air. This is the moment when the ancient Persians utilized one of their most brilliant, almost magical inventions. To cool down, a servant might bring you a small, beautifully carved wooden bowl. You hold it in your hands, and to your absolute astonishment, the bowl is freezing cold. Inside the bowl is crushed ice. Finding ice in the middle of a baking, arid desert summer seems completely impossible. Yet, the Persians found a way. Just outside the city walls, they built massive dome-shaped structures called yakshals, literally meaning ice pits. These structures look like giant, smooth beehives rising out of the sand. The engineering was flawlessly simple, yet entirely brilliant. The thick walls of the dome were made of a special mortar called sarouge, a mixture of clay, sand, ash, goat hair, and remarkably, egg whites. This mixture created an impenetrable insulation that completely blocked the transfer of heat. During the freezing, bitter nights of winter, water was channeled into shallow pools next to the dome where it would freeze solid. The ice was then harvested, dragged deep underground into the belly of the yakshal, and sealed away. Months later, In the blistering heat of August, the ice remained perfectly frozen in the dark, silent depths of the earth. Look down at the wooden bowl in your hands. The crushed, crystalline ice has been generously drizzled with a thick, sweet syrup made from wild mountain grapes. Perhaps it is splashed with a few drops of pure rose water and sprinkled with the bright green dust of crushed pistachios. This is the distant ancestor of sorbet, a treat known as falude or sharbat. Take a small bite. The sharp, sweet, freezing cold is a delightful shock to the senses. It melts instantly on your tongue, carrying the floral, relaxing taste of the rosewater straight to your head. Enjoying this freezing delicacy while sitting on a soft woolen rug, shielded entirely from the desert sun by thick earthen walls, is the very definition of ancient luxury. It is the deep, satisfying comfort of knowing that human ingenuity has completely tamed the harshness of the environment. Eventually, the long afternoon slowly surrenders to the dusk. The harsh, bright blue of the sky fades, softening into a bruised purple, and then into a deep, velvety indigo. The air temperature drops rapidly. This is the time when the house transforms once again. The central courtyard, having trapped the cool air all day, is now perfectly comfortable. But the family does not stay inside. They move upward. Following a narrow set of stone steps, you walk up to the flat roof of the house. In ancient Persia, the roof was the ultimate living room. The thick mud brick walls below have absorbed the intense heat of the sun all day long. And now, as the night falls, the roof gently radiates a soft, soothing warmth upward, working like a natural heating pad beneath your feet. Thick, woven cushions and heavy woolen blankets are brought up and arranged on the flat surface. You lie back, resting your head on a soft pillow. The air up here is incredibly fresh, carrying a light, playful breeze that sweeps over the sleeping city. Look up. Without the glare of modern electric lights, the night sky is not a dark, empty void. It is overwhelmingly crowded. It is a brilliant, blindingly bright canopy of silver and blue, dusted with the milky, glowing river of our galaxy. The stars feel so close, so deeply present, that you almost feel as though you could reach up and brush them with your fingertips. The Persians did not fear the night sky. They found profound comfort in it. They were some of the greatest astronomers of the ancient world. They spent countless quiet nights just like this one, resting on their roofs, observing the slow, majestic turning of the heavens. They charted the constellations, tracking the predictable, mathematical paths of the wandering planets. There is a deep, psychological peace in astronomy. When you lie on a warm roof and watch the stars, you realize that despite the chaos of human life, despite the changing of kings, the passing of seasons, and the petty anxieties of the day, the universe is functioning in perfect, beautiful order. The star that rises tonight will rise exactly on time tomorrow night. The world is spinning exactly as it should. Listen to the ambient sounds of the city settling into sleep. The rhythmic clop-clop of a late traveler's horse echoing softly in an empty street below. The distant, lonely bark of a dog. The very faint, hypnotic hum of a neighbor quietly playing a wooden lute on their own roof a few houses away. Lying there, wrapped in a soft woolen blanket, tasting the lingering sweetness of rosewater and watching the eternal turning of the stars, it is easy to believe that this golden age will simply last forever. The roads are safe. The gardens are blooming. The empire feels as solid and as permanent as the Zagros Mountains themselves. But history is a wheel, and a wheel must always turn. A long, beautiful summer must eventually give way to autumn. The leaves must fall, and the earth must rest. As the decades slowly pass, The perfect harmony established by Cyrus and Darius begins to stretch. The vast borders of the empire grow heavy. The kings who follow do not always possess the gentle touch of the gardener or the precise mind of the architect. The peaceful, starlit silence of the ancient nights will soon be broken by a new sound approaching from the west. A sound not of merchants or couriers, but the rhythmic, unstoppable marching of a young, incredibly ambitious king from Macedonia. The long day of the Achaemenid Empire has reached its beautiful golden twilight. And now, the turning of the page approaches. There is a profound, universal truth woven into the fabric of nature. Nothing that blooms can hold its blossom forever. A flower must eventually drop its petals so that the fruit can grow. The sun must dip below the western horizon so that the earth can rest and cool. Even the most magnificent, perfectly balanced empires are not exempt from this gentle, inevitable rhythm. For over 2 centuries, the Achaemenid Empire was the blazing sun of the ancient world. But as the generations slipped by, the brilliant, vital energy of Cyrus and the precise, organizing genius of Darius began to soften. The empire had grown impossibly wealthy. The treasuries of Susa and Ecbatana were overflowing with gold coins, precious gems, and heavy silver talents. Yet, with that immense comfort came a certain heaviness. The vast administrative machine, once a marvel of speed and efficiency, started to slow down. The kings who inherited the throne were no longer the tough, observant nomads of the mountains. They were born into unimaginable luxury, raised behind thick palace walls, shielded from the wind and the dust of the real world. The royal road still hummed with couriers, but the messages carried less urgency. The great gardens of Pasargadae were still beautiful, but perhaps the edges were just a little overgrown. The geometric lines of the water channels softened by encroaching wild mint. The empire was like a magnificent ancient oak tree in the late days of autumn. Its roots were deep, its trunk was massive, but the sap was moving slower, and the leaves were turning a dry, brittle gold, ready to be caught by the next strong wind. That wind arrived from the west. It did not blow from a massive, wealthy kingdom, but from a rugged, mountainous region north of Greece called Macedonia. Leading this tempest was a young king named Alexander. If the Persian Empire at this time was a slow, heavy, majestic river, Alexander was a flash flood. He was 22 years old, driven by a restless, burning energy, and completely captivated by the romantic myths of ancient heroes. When Alexander crossed the narrow waters of the Hellespont and stepped onto the soil of Asia, he brought a completely different rhythm to the world. The Persian armies marched out to meet him, vast and colorful, glittering with polished bronze and carrying the banners of 50 nations. But the old magic, the deep unity that had once made them invincible, was tired. History books will readily detail the great battles: Granicus, Issus, Gaugamela. They will speak of tactics, chariots, and the clash of spears. But out here, in the quiet space of our journey, we do not need to dwell on the noise of war. Instead, view it from a distance, like watching a dry late summer storm rolling across a vast plain. You see the flashes of lightning far away. You hear the low rumbling thunder shaking the earth, but you are completely safe under shelter. The storm is simply nature running its course, clearing the heavy, stagnant air to make way for a new season. Darius III, the final great king of the Achaemenid line, was not the cowardly villain that Greek historians often painted him to be. He was a man caught in an impossible tide. He watched the young Macedonian move with a speed the ancient world had never seen, bypassing the heavy fortresses, ignoring the established rules of engagement. As the Persian defenses folded, Darius retreated into the mountains, leaving the great open plains to the conqueror. It is fascinating to observe what happened when Alexander finally walked through the towering gates of Babylon and Susa. The Greeks had always spoken of the Persians with a mixture of fear and arrogance, believing their own small city-states were the absolute center of civilization. But as Alexander stepped into the cool, silent archives, as he walked across the breathtakingly soft woolen carpets and tasted the freezing snow-cooled sherbets, the young conqueror was entirely conquered himself. He did not destroy the Persian administration. He was mesmerized by it. He saw the sheer brilliance of the postal system, the fairness of the standardized weights, and the magnificent, welcoming architecture of the palaces. Alexander began to wear the soft, flowing Persian robes. He adopted the gentle court customs, much to the frustration of his own rough Macedonian generals. The fierce, rushing wind of his conquest was immediately softened by the deep, ancient gravity of Persian culture. The old empire was falling, yes, but it was catching its conqueror in a soft, silken net as it went down. Yet, there is one event in this twilight era that carries a deep, bittersweet melancholy. The arrival at Persepolis, when the Macedonian army marched up the mountain of Mercy and stood before the grand, double-ramped staircase. The city was practically empty. The great festival of Nowruz was long over. The massive cedar doors were closed. Alexander and his inner circle moved into the palaces, walking beneath the shadows of the gentle, winged Lamassu. For several months, they lived among the towering columns of the Apadana. And then, on one fateful night, a fire was lit. Scholars still whisper about exactly how it happened. Some say it was a tragic accident during a loud drunken feast. Others believe it was a deliberate symbolic act of revenge for the burning of Athens a century earlier. Whatever the spark, the flames quickly found the ancient, dry cedar beams of the magnificent roofs. Let us not picture this as a scene of terror. The city, remember, was a ceremonial stage, empty of families and merchants. Instead, view it as a quiet, somber release. Watch from a distance as the bright orange glow blooms against the dark, jagged silhouette of the Zagros Mountains. The incredibly thick tapestries, which had absorbed the hushed conversations of diplomats for 200 years, turned to ash. The fragrant cedar wood, brought all the way from Lebanon, crackles and pops, releasing its sweet, heavy perfume into the night sky one final time. The massive stone columns, heated by the blaze, begin to crack and flake, the smooth limestone returning to the rough earth from which it was originally carved. A massive pillar of smoke rises into the quiet, starlit night. It drifts upward, carrying the memories of Cyrus's gardens, the rhythm of the royal road, and the gentle clinking of the gold darricks. The physical city of Persepolis is ending, but its spirit is simply untethered, floating away on the mountain breeze, becoming a myth, a legend that will inspire poets and kings for thousands of years to come. By the time the sun rises over the Mavdash plain, the fire has burned itself out. A thick, soft layer of pale grey ash covers the great stone terrace, settling gently over the stairs like a fresh, quiet snowfall. The air is entirely still. The great kings are gone. The long golden day of the Achaemenid Empire has finally ended. Alexander would soon move on, marching further east into India, chasing the edge of the world. His own brilliant, chaotic flame would burn out just a few years later, leaving his massive, fractured kingdom to be fought over by his generals. The noise of his passing was loud, but it was incredibly brief. Beneath the marching boots of shifting armies, beneath the changing of titles and the redrawing of maps, The true heart of Persia never stopped beating. The empires of men are fragile things, built of words and clay, easily washed away by the tides of time. But the earth remains. The people remain. Down in the valleys, the brilliant, silent underground aqueducts continued to flow, carrying cold mountain water to the thirsty plains. The weavers still sat at their heavy wooden looms, their fingers tying the same complex, beautiful knots, passing the secrets of the madder root and the indigo dye down to their children. The shepherds still drove their stubborn, wandering goats up into the high alpine pastures when the spring snows melted. When the sun set, families still gathered around the warm, glowing embers of the hearth fire. They still baked flatbread on hot stones. And as the sparks floated up toward the eternal, turning canopy of the stars, the elders still told stories. They just added new names to the old tales. They spoke of the father, Cyrus, who planted the first paradise, and of the young, restless conqueror from the west, who came and went like a sudden summer storm. The world had shifted. The chapter had closed. But the feeling of the land, the deep, resonant rhythm of the mountains and the plains, was entirely undisturbed. The empire had simply closed its eyes, let out a long, slow breath, and drifted into a deep, peaceful slumber under the shifting sands. As the centuries quietly stacked upon one another, the winds of the plateau slowly began to bury the ruins, hiding the great stone bulls and the sweeping staircases beneath a soft blanket of earth, waiting patiently for the day when they would be remembered again. Let us stay here for a moment. Let us sit in the quiet aftermath, as the dust settles and the stars watch over the sleeping stones. Time, in the grand scheme of the universe, is not a cruel thief. It is a very slow, very patient artist. It smooths the sharp edges of history, sweeping away the loud noises of battle and the harsh voices of kings, leaving only the quietest, most enduring truths behind. Over the next 2,000 years, the seasons turned with a gentle, hypnotic rhythm across the Iranian plateau. The heavy, biting winter snows would fall, blanketing the ruined terraces of Persepolis in absolute, blinding white. Then the spring would arrive, melting the frost into clear streams, coaxing tiny, bright green weeds to push their way through the cracks in the polished limestone floors. The baking summer sun would bleach the fallen cedar beams until they crumbled into dust, and the autumn winds would blow the fine, golden sand of the mauve-dashed plain over the grand staircases, layer by microscopic layer. The earth was simply taking back what belonged to it. It was pulling the blanket up to the chin of the ancient world, tucking it in for a long, well-deserved rest. If you were to travel to that high, sweeping plain today, long after the great empires of antiquity have faded into the pages of history books, you would find a landscape that is profoundly, beautifully quiet. Let us take one final walk together, not in the bustling, colorful past, but in the serene, echoing present. The sun is setting, painting the vast sky in those familiar, ancient shades of bruised purple and liquid gold. We are walking across the empty, dusty fields of Pasargadae. The elaborate water channels are dry now. The towering cedar trees and the fragrant roses of the world's first paradise garden are gone, returning their nutrients to the deep soil long ago. But standing entirely alone in the center of the windswept plain is a single, magnificent structure. It is the tomb of Cyrus the Great. Compared to the massive, sprawling pyramids of Egypt or the towering monuments of Rome, it is wonderfully, surprisingly humble. It is built of massive blocks of pale white limestone, stacked into 6 wide, simple steps. On top of those steps rests a small, rectangular stone house with a gently pitched roof. It looks exactly like the simple, sturdy wooden homes the ancient mountain tribes used to build, simply translated into eternal stone. There are no terrifying statues guarding it. There are no carved curses warning travelers to stay away. It is just a quiet, dignified resting place. Alexander the Great himself stood before this very tomb, paused in absolute respect, and ordered his men to repair any damage it had suffered. He recognized that the man resting inside was not just a king, but a profound architect of human dignity. Stand before the pale stone steps and listen. The only sound is the wind whistling across the dry grass. It is the exact same wind that blew through the woven goat hair tents of the early nomads. The tomb has survived massive earthquakes, the marching of countless armies, and the slow grinding of millennia. It stands as a completely silent, unbreakable promise that a legacy built on tolerance and respect will outlast any fortress built on fear. Now, let the evening breeze carry you a few miles south, back to the Mountain of Mercy. The great terrace of Persepolis still clings to the rock. The massive, double-ramp staircase is still there, its shallow steps still forcing visitors to slow down, to breathe, and to adopt a peaceful, measured pace. Walk up those steps one last time in the fading twilight. At the top, the gate of all nations still stands. The wooden doors are gone, but the great stone lamassu are still at their posts. Their faces are weathered by 2,000 years of rain and wind, their intricate feathers smoothed down by time. Yet, their eyes still look out over the plain with that same calm, serene, protective wisdom. They are still holding the chaos at bay. Beyond the gate, the Apadana is no longer a dark, enclosed hall of cedar and silk. Only a handful of the 72 original columns remain standing. They rise out of the rocky earth like the pale, bleached ribs of a massive, ancient ship that has run aground on a quiet shore. Without the roof to hold them down, these slender, fluted pillars seem to reach straight up into the cosmos, pointing toward the arriving stars. Walk among these towering stones. Rest your hand against the cool limestone. Close your eyes and feel the deep, heavy permanence of the place. The physical empire fell, yes. The gold derrick stopped circulating, the royal road was eventually swallowed by the desert, and the couriers finally unsaddled their horses. But the true Achaemenid Empire never completely vanished. It simply dissolved into the water supply of the world, shaping the way we live in ways we rarely even notice. Every time you step into a walled garden to escape the noise of the city, you are sitting in a paradisa. You are sharing a quiet moment with Cyrus. Every time you travel safely across a border, every time you send a letter across the world and trust that it will arrive, you are riding on the legacy of Darius and his magnificent, organized mind. And every time you sit at a table with people from different backgrounds, speaking different languages, and you simply share a meal in peace, choosing to see the beauty in your differences rather than finding a reason to fight, you are keeping the eternal flame of Nowruz alive. You are rebuilding the Apadana, not with stone, but with your own open heart. The ancient Persians taught us that the world is incredibly vast, and sometimes it can be terrifying. But they also taught us that we do not have to live in the dark. We have the power to plant a tree in the dust. We have the ability to weave a beautiful rug to cover the cold earth. We have the choice to build gates that welcome the world, rather than walls that shut it out. The night has fully arrived now. The ruins of Persepolis are bathed in the soft, milky light of the moon. The Mountain of Mercy casts a long, gentle shadow over the terrace. It is time to leave the ancient world behind and return to your own. Allow the wind whistling through the broken columns to fade away. Let the scent of dry earth and old stone slowly dissolve from your mind. Bring your awareness back to the room you are in. Feel the softness of the bed beneath you. It is your own personal sanctuary, your own quiet pavilion holding the chaos of the day far, far away. Notice the gentle, rhythmic rising and falling of your chest. It is a slow, steady, completely reliable rhythm, like the quiet flowing of an underground river, or the soft padding of a camel's feet on a dark, sandy path. There is nothing left to build tonight. There are no messages to send, no roads to travel, no empires to manage. The heavy lifting of the day is entirely finished. Just as the sun must set on the greatest of cities, your mind is allowed to power down. Give yourself permission to let go of the reins. Let your shoulders drop into the mattress, heavy and relaxed. Unclench your jaw. Let the tiny muscles around your eyes soften and smooth out. Picture the dying embers of a campfire in the high Zagros Mountains. The flames have settled into a soft, pulsing, cherry-red glow. It is warm, it is safe, and it is perfectly still. The vast, velvet canopy of the night sky is watching over you, turning in its beautiful, endless, predictable mathematical dance. Everything is exactly where it is supposed to be. You are safe. You are warm. You are entirely at peace. As the last echo of the ancient world fades into the starlight, let yourself drift. Drift away from the words, away from the history, and down into the deep, quiet, comforting embrace of a beautiful night's sleep. Good night, my friend. Sleep well.